Welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations, DGAP, and welcome to this week's edition of our Thursday morning briefings. My name is Jan Stöckmann, and I'm head of the Director's Office here at DGAP. It is my great pleasure to be chairing this morning's briefing. This series started focusing on Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, but this morning we will talk about disinformation campaigns and democratic resilience. Disinformation, of course, is not new. We have all, I think, been exposed to politically or commercially motivated stories that are misleading, fabricated, or outright false. We now know, for example, that the 2016 US presidential election was influenced by Russian actors known as the Internet Research Agency or Kremlin bots. We know how Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro used a group of entrepreneurs to fund a campaign targeting WhatsApp users with fake news about his opponent in the 2018 election campaign. We know since March this year about Russian-backed propaganda network paying EU politicians to spread fake news via the Prague-based news portal Voice of Europe. Over the past years, the technological finesse and the volume of disinformation campaigns have reached new levels. With artificial intelligence tools at people's fingertips, fake news, and in particular images, are increasingly widespread and sophisticated. Traditional media outlets struggle to keep up with fact-checking and correcting a growing number of disruptive actors. We have seen recently how AI-generated audio and video content was used in the 2023 Slovak and Bangladeshi elections, as well as in the ongoing US presidential election, with fake calls coming from Joe Biden urging voters not to vote in the primaries. In the run-up to the European election, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has been attacked on TikTok for allegedly speaking badly about Polish national identity. This was not an AI-generated campaign, but a statement widely taken out of context and at least as damaging. At the same time, governments and social media companies have been unable or unwilling to install effective regulations. So are we ready for disinformation warfare in times of geopolitical tensions? Are our democracies resilient enough? And what can we do ourselves as researchers, as journalists, and as citizens to counter disinformation? To discuss these questions, I'm honored to introduce two excellent speakers today. First will be Peter Limburg, who is Director General at Deutsche Welle, DW, Germany's public international broadcaster, a position he has held since 2013. Previously, he served as editor-in-chief at N24 and a news anchor at Sat.1 inter alia, and held previous positions as reporter and journalist in a whole host of places, including London, Brussels, Iraq, Israel, and Algeria. Welcome, Peter Limburg.
Thank you. Good morning.
Second will be our own Dr. Katja Munoz, a research fellow at DGAP's Center for Geopolitics, Economics, and Technology. Katja works on social media influences, the dynamics of disinformation and platform regulation. And she's also mapping and monitoring AI's impact on electoral processes. So very relevant for today. Glad to have you, Katja.
Hi, thank you.
Before we begin, just a few housekeeping announcements. We would like to remind everyone that this event is being recorded and will be uploaded subsequently. We will kick off our conversation here on the panel with about 5 minutes of intro remarks each. And then we will open up for your questions from the audience after about 20-25 minutes. Since we have only two speakers today, we will finish at about 9:15. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function in Zoom or post it in the chat, although we prefer live interaction. And when you are invited to speak, please briefly introduce yourself and keep your comments or questions relatively short so we can take up as many as possible. Finally, just a word of thanks to all my colleagues at DGAP helping in this series, including Milan Nitsch, Henning Hoff, Joel Lever, Helga Beck, and others. Now, without much further ado, I'm very interested to hear your perspectives as Director General of Deutsche Welle. Peter Limburg, over to you.
Yeah, thank you again, and welcome everybody here. I think the topic for us at Deutsche Welle as international media broadcaster has a lot of interesting connections. So first of all, it's the question of falsification of our content, which is dangerous for us. Our media house lives from credibility in our content, and so attempts to falsificate and to fake our content are difficult for us. And the other topic, which is important, is the question: how do we reach our users in a more and more blocked market in the internet, which is no longer free? If you look at China, if you look at Russia, and look at Iran, the attempts to block foreign media out and to leave their public only with their own propaganda is something which is also difficult for us. So maybe first of all, and this is why we're talking about this disinformation, and disinformation, especially in the AI sector, is getting more and more common, unfortunately. On the other hand, we see a lot of chances in AI. AI can make journalism better. It can help our journalists to make more intensive research, to produce better journalism. But we see, and we talk about today, about the difficulties with AI. And for instance, there's one example which we just recently saw, is that a video was purely made by AI, trying to harass a Pakistani female human rights activist who is actively working for the rights of children. And obviously, opponents of her, or enemies, have created with AI a video accusing her to be corrupt on donations and using donations, money donations, for her own luxury, which is totally false. But this AI video was probably created in a couple of minutes. And unfortunately, it had, in a couple of days, more than 160,000 views. So it is very difficult to counter this. Obviously, we try, but this will be something which we will see in the future more and more. And in the past, these falsifications were very easy to identify. Nowadays, we saw that they're getting better and better. And yes, there is still, for people who are common with DW content and with DW graphics, they can see quite quickly that this is not a pure, real DW video. But for users who are not so common with our graphics and the way how we produce our content, it is very difficult to judge. So, and this is also an attack not only on the human rights activists, which I just mentioned. It's also an attack on us, because the target also is the credibility of a media house, which is known for its credibility in most of the world regions. So this is giving us some food for thoughts how to counter this. We try to do this via the possibility of bookmarking our content. We are talking with other networks in a global alliance, so that we can be technically better than the ones who are trying to fake us. But it's still a challenge. And maybe we have also time today to speak about the other topic, which is problematic for us, is that more and more autocrats are trying to block free media, which also is a problem for, I think, the way how international media works. And so I think I will do a stop now to give Katja Munoz also enough time to bring in her topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Katja Munoz, allow me to ask just a brief follow-up question, since you mentioned other malign actors posing as Deutsche Welle. We saw this doppelganger operation creating clone versions of official media websites, including France's Le Monde and The Guardian and Bild a while ago. And France's own government agency, Viginum, was helpful in identifying these and countering this operation. So what I'm asking you, I guess, is, are media organizations well equipped themselves to counter such attacks? Or would you argue that we need government support and agencies like France's Viginum?
I think it is first of all, we have to check our content. So I think we have to be active ourselves. And but at the end, we don't have so many possibilities, either technically or financially, to find everything and also to counter it. First of all, we are not an agency to counter any misinformation. We are an international media house, and I think it is always important that governments from free democratic countries work actively against internet blockades, and they also have to work actively against falsifications. But it's first of all, I think, something which we have to also monitor, and then try to find as much as possible allies to counter this. Yes.
Not an easy task, definitely, and we'll come back to this. But now let me hand over to Katja. Katja, the World Economic Forum's report at the beginning of this year said that disinformation was the primary global risk in their analysis of risks this year. So I suppose it's been a fairly busy year for you and your research. And I wonder whether the promise of 2024 as being the first AI disinformation election year has lived up so far. And we had you on the morning briefing at the beginning of this year. And so I'm curious to hear what your sort of mid-year assessment is now. Over to you.
Thank you, Jan. Yes, there is a lot going on, not only on the mis and disinformation front, but also in the political campaigning, which I find is also very, you could say it's the same coin, but the other side, right? We have the covert and professionalized strategic manipulation, and then we have political campaigns who also have the goal of strategically manipulate voters to vote for them, but they do it transparently, or should do it transparently and openly. And then also we have AI deployment by governments in a sense. But let me just take a step back and kind of try to contextualize this whole AI thing, because I find that everybody just talks AI, but maybe we do not know exactly what it means or make it more tangible in a sense. So for me, AI, I obviously have been working in the context of democracy and elections for the past couple of months, 6 months, 7 months minimum, I say. But in general, I've always been kind of focusing on the topic of mobilization potentials. That means that I try to identify patterns and trends on and offline. And that includes looking at digital strategies or different actors within the information space, more or less. And that means that I also work with influencers, as you already mentioned, and trying to understand the various demographics within the information space, their preferences, their goals, their interests, and also different social media platforms and the dynamics and how they interact, interoperability, as they would say. The reason I started getting more and more into AI was to try to really understand how it's going to impact my field, how it's going to impact mobilization potential or social media platforms in a sense. And for me, what I kind of figured out is, yes, artificial intelligence is perhaps one of the most profound technologies that has been developed by humans. And why? Because previous milestones in our human development, everything you see is very mechanical, right? We have the steam engine, we have levers, we have flying, we drive cars, but nothing really touches intelligence. And that's what artificial intelligence does. And that's why we kind of feel, icky, I would say, about it in a way. It's like, oh my God, it's touching actually something that I thought was exclusively human. And if I talk AI in terms of democracy, what pops to mind, as we're already mentioning, is the biggest problem that we perceive would be mis and disinformation. But it is also about a relationship, or I would say the social risk associated with it should also be about a relationship to data and to privacy and to fairness in general. And technological progress as such in general, I mean, it's always advancing, it's getting quicker, right? But now with AI, what I see is that there's a far greater social and cultural change associated with it, because much more of what we see online has been created or at least manipulated by AI. And I don't even say the future, because estimates already suggest that in 2025, that means 7 months from now on, more than 95% of content online will be synthetic or at least manipulated by AI. And it will be very much more difficult to distinguish what is man-made and what is not. And man-made could also be authentic in that sense. I don't know, like depending on what you want to decide as as a definition on it. So yes, before, like even a couple of months ago, it was easier even for experts in the field to differentiate what is authentic and what is synthetic. By now, it's very, very difficult. Even we do have to really look into it and take some time to do that. Now, what is important in the sense is obviously clear labeling, transparency, comprehensive communication is very important to create social acceptance and trust in dealing with this technology with society. And that also means that we need a solid governance framework and ethical guidelines. I already mentioned transparency, I mentioned labeling, to ensure that these AI technologies for content generation are developed responsibly. We do have the Digital Services Act in the EU, and we do have the EU AI Act. And I think together, if they are enforced correctly and hopefully in a strong way, it might kind of provide us with a safety net. We'll see how it goes, because we'll see. That's the only thing I can say. But at least we do have some tools in our hands now. Since we're also going to talk about elections, obviously this is the super election year, and you already mentioned, yes, it's also the AI year, but I would first say that it's most of, I think the first thing that it's the year of democracy. And then we can say it's about AI. And AI is going to be very disruptive, obviously, and it does have a very big impact on the electoral process, with the potential that we cannot yet grasp. We see some tendencies, but there's a big but. We need to prepare for it anyway. We can't just sit down and say, okay, we're going to see and watch what is going to happen. What we're already seeing is that artificial intelligence in general is revolutionizing campaign strategies. It's accelerating the automation of electoral processes. It's enabling the creation of content on a larger scale. And a lot of it is being used to manipulate voter sentiment through disinformation. And why this is kind of dangerous, just to make the connection clear again, more and more people are mainly consuming news via social media. That means that the potential for influence alone is generally very high already, even before AI. And now if we add AI, the strategic manipulation of people is a problem, which is exacerbated through the easy access of generative AI. And generative AI is, just to give you, because it sounds also very big, it's something like ChatGPT, something where you just put in the prompt and then it pops out whatever you want to have, text, audio, visuals, and so on. But why is it exacerbated? Because we do have easy access to Gen AI models. The only thing you need is an email, and pop, you have access to a Gen AI model. It accelerates content creation because of only one prompt that I use. Content can be hyper-personalized to specific demographics, even to specific people. And as I said before, it's also easy to use. That means that in sum, the costs and the professional know-how needed to launch online campaigns of this scales have come down by a lot. And the result is our information space on social media platforms are currently flooded with synthetic posts. And these synthetic posts are used to kind of supercharge existing and very highly efficient digital strategies that existed already. And I don't want to go too deep into this because that's another topic, but we've been struggling to cope with the digital strategies that are so effective already to manipulate the information space.
Katja, allow me to jump in here with a quick follow-up question and then enter into a conversation. But I want to ask you actually a quick follow-up as well, because since you mentioned the Digital Services Act, and since you mentioned the way in which actors on social media are challenging traditional media outlets, I saw a recent study by the nonprofit AI Forensics that found that fewer than 5% of undeclared political ads shown on Facebook across 16 European countries were caught by Meta's detection system. And so I wonder, are the regulations that are in place today, are they actually effectively catching the activities ongoing, or do governments, in particular the European government, also have to step up to cope with the trends that you just described? And I already want to invite our audience to then come in with questions via the chat or by raising your hands as Katja is answering this brief follow-up question.
I would say on the Digital Services Act, it does have some functions that are already being used, such as, for instance, the ability to really report disinformation. And in that sense, I guess this would be the one that is not so efficient and catching everything that is political advertisement. But there's one thing that hasn't been really yet deployed, and that would be the access to data that the Digital Services Act allows. And that means that if we as researchers do get access to platform data, even if anonymized, we do get a better sense of what is actually happening. Because political ads, it's not just one ad that will kind of push somebody to believe something else. It's the wave of ads. It's deployed or also amplified by influencers and bots, and then it becomes a pattern, a trend, and that's something that we can actually catch through data access. And then it doesn't really matter if it's only this one political ad, because through that we would be able to see, okay, this is happening. Also, Facebook, I was looking at the political ads because the books, as they say, because they're free to see. It's really difficult to catch what one party has actually given as a money, because they're very complicated in reporting. So it's something that I find maybe they don't want to be too transparent, although they have to be. So it's a bit more complicated. It's not as transparent as Google, the ad library, I would say. So I would say once all the tools are deployed by the Digital Services Act, it will be difficult to not find, or it will be easier to identify really influence campaigns, because a political ad is always accompanied by a lot of different factors to be really effective. It's part of a strategy.
Thank you. Okay, let's bring in questions from the audience, but I also want to bring in Peter Limburg again, and perhaps Mr. Limburg, you could elaborate a little more on both of the points that you made. You spoke about countries blocking free media, and you spoke about various disruptive actors spreading fake news and forming a new sort of competition for traditional media outlets. And I wonder if you could, to both those problems, put a few names and describe in a little more detail and a little more specificity with what kind of actors we are having to deal as media outlets, but also as European democracies, I guess, to understand and get a better grasp of what is ahead in the future.
Well, naming the actors on blockade is easier than naming the ones who are working from a clandestine environment and trying to fake videos. So I think it's clear that the ones who are blocking us are Russia, China, Iran. Turkey is limiting our access to the market, so we can't broadcast on our DW.com, so it's blocked. So these are the countries who are working on this. Belarus also. And just to give the context, before the war started, 3 weeks before, we got kicked out of our office in Moscow. We had been declared an enemy and an illegal operation. So everybody had to leave Russia, and we hadn't been very close friends to Russians in the past, but this escalated before the war. And so they tried everything to block our content. The only way to get in, not the only way, because we're using VPNs, we're using the Tor network, we're using a lot of possibilities for our users to get access. And we still have YouTube, which is helping us because YouTube is open also in Russia. So we can get a lot of content in. But it is not easy. So we have to work on this, and the Russians getting better. They learn from the Chinese, obviously, which are the best in blocking their internet. And others also learn. And we are getting blocked also in Venezuela. So it's a bit of a trend. We will always find measures. But I think what is really necessary is that in this case, politics has to intervene. Free European and American democracies must have an interest that the messages that we broadcast on international media, on independent international media, are accessible for everybody in the world. So blocking the content is something which will not help democracies, because then we can't get any arguments to other people, and in Russia or in China or in Iran. So I think it's a task for politics also to help international media there, to make the internet free and not to have only internet separation, so that you have a lot of different internets in the world. the question who is behind the falsification of videos is more difficult because, for instance, in this Pakistani example, it is quite obvious that there are people who are coming out of Pakistan trying to discreditate the young woman human rights activist. So other examples, for instance, where our videos had been faked, where like that they tried to give the impression that all the demonstrations of agriculture, demonstrations against the European agricultural politics are directed against Ukraine because the Europeans don't want Ukraine grain coming into the European market. So it is obviously directed against Ukrainians. So it is also other videos Instagram videos where President Zelensky was shown as a cannibal, was also obviously made by enemies of the Ukraine. So you can guess who they are. And so I think a lot of content is coming also there from Russia and Russian trolls. And they have, with AI, they have now more and more potential of doing well-made falsifications. And if you see that you can easily also give voices, so you can change my voice and let me speak something totally different, this will not is not a good perspective on for us. But on the other hand, it's not the thing to say, okay, we can't do anything. So I agree totally with Katja Munoz that we have to prepare, we have to act. And I think what is really important is that we invest much more into media literacy. Mm-hmm. Media literacy is key. It takes time, yes, but if we don't start now, we will lose another generation. And to tell them how they can easily make the difference between some falsification and something which is coming from an original source. So mm-hmm. I think this is key.
Thank you. Perhaps both of you could spell out how to educate, how to make people media literate, as you say that. But I also want to bring in more questions that we have coming in the chat. Frauke Sebas is asking the $1 million question about keeping the internet free, but also at the same time holding those accountable that abuse that freedom. Perhaps we could pause that question for a little bit and actually keep it for the end, because it is the $1 million question. But there are two other questions in the chat that are perhaps more hands-on and that I would channel to each one of you. The one by Husna Hassan is directed at what reporters and journalists can do specifically to prove that certain pieces of information that are disseminated on the internet are not authentic and that their own reporting is authentic. And also connected to this question, where is the thin line between being a journalist and an activist in trying to counter certain pieces of information in a normative sense also. So that's the hands-on question for the journalist, I suppose. And then David Guthoff is asking, what can be done to counter challenges of disinformation campaigns, and how can our societies become more resilient? And asking specifically about successful strategies in other countries, for example, Finland and the Baltics. Perhaps, Katja, you have a couple of ideas on this one. So let's delve into the hands-on things that can be done, media literacy, and then specifically with regard to both journalists and I guess think tank society in general. Why don't we go backwards this time and start with Katja and then come back to Peter?
These were a lot of questions. I would just focus on one thing, on one thing that touches upon several questions that I heard, like the countering, or how do we keep free our information system? How do we protect ourselves from disinformation? I would say definitely media literacy. It's a very long-term investment, obviously, and it's a whole society approach that needs to be continuous. That's also what the Baltics do with Finnish. For instance, they have this playbook that they have every recurring 2 or 3 years, or even shorter intervals in different segments of the demographic. They continuously have these efforts of media literacy accuracy to update whatever is happening. And the resilience is higher because the trust in governments is higher. So if the trust, there's this correlation. We don't know exactly what to do to increase trust in government, because it's a general problem that this variable is declining in Western democracies, but not so much in Finland and the Baltics. And then the question is, how can we actually reverse this trend in order to become more resilient? Because if you are trusting, then you do not believe if somebody says something bad about the government, or let's say, that's very simply put, but it kind of touches the nerve. And about how can we protect our information space? Because I think that that's very important. Our information space, it's a pillar of democracy, actually, to have access to reliable information. And if we do not have that, then it's a problem, because we lose trust in, the media, in information, and maybe where we can find reliable information, and even in democracy itself. And I think the responsibility should obviously also be put onto platforms, but not so much into let's change everything about platforms, because we see the resistance. It's a very long-term game. How many years did we take to get into the Digital Market Services Act, or the Markets Act, in a sense? I would just say we can talk about the mechanics of platforms. For instance, the problem with these influence campaigns and why some of them are very, very effective is that 50,000 or 40,000 or 230,000 inauthentic accounts, bots, are flooding the space, and then you don't know what to believe. And that's a problem. It's not the one person that does not believe what you believe. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, right? We are in a democracy, after all, even if it's not true. The problem is, how do we get to the point that why so many people disbelieve and distrust government and media? And there we have something that we could say, why don't we try to make it harder for bots, for instance, to go online and just flood the information space? And that's something very easy to do, because 50,000 accounts is not something you do. Well, actually, right now it is something you do with the finger snap, right? But what if we just impose higher barriers for entry to platforms? What if we do a CAPTCHA? I mean, right now, the only thing you need is one letter and one email, and then you sign on, and that's how you can get an account online on every platform. You just need some kind of smart device, a computer or a phone, to access it. Why don't we have a CAPTCHA that make it the time confusion, like the time consumed to really sign up, much more difficult? Why don't we impose limits on reposting certain types of content? Why don't, these are just mechanics and some ideas, right? Why don't we, before elections, let's say, change or force platforms to change the algorithm to a chronological one, like 72 hours before an election, so that the potential for virality of disinformation or possibly fake content, whatever, is not so high to become viral anymore? Why do we, these are platform mechanics, and these are easy steps. It's just a matter of really sitting down and thinking, how can we make it harder for 50,000 bots to actually get their message across? That's what we need to think about, also. And then we can also talk about media. This is something on a parallel. It's not a one either or. It's like we need to do media literacy, and from the first grade on, and depending on where we are, and also not media, but tech literacy. What is AI in the sense? AI can be so, people still think about AI and maybe do not realize that it's obviously almost impossible for an untrained eye to see some content and not think that it is AI generated, or that it's not real. And just to give you an example, we as humans, our superpower, our relationships, it's our instinct, it's our gut feeling, these things. But it's kind of challenged if we see something that all of a sudden is not real anymore. And so I think it's very important to kind of come up with something like that. And blocking the internet or democratic access. I find TikTok in general, I'm not for censure, but TikTok, yeah, sorry, somebody talked. So the censure of TikTok, I think it's, I'm not having a good, yes, I guess if all the other platforms are still working, it's fine. TikTok, I'm just not sure if it's just another platform. I think there is some agenda behind it. So, I mean, there's no proof or evidence because we do not have access to the data, but it kind of feels as if there's some manipulation going on. So I would say, yes, TikTok can be a problem. I think if the divestiture ban policy in the US will turn out to be a ban, then in the EU, we will have sometime soon similar conversations. I'm not sure of the outcome, but that's like a feeling that I have, because it just, I don't know, it feels off somehow compared to others.
Thank you, Katja. Perhaps we'll come back to TikTok since there are two more questions on this. But I, for one, would certainly be happy to take an AI class with you, because as a media consumer myself, I'm finding it increasingly hard to, as you say, tell apart with my own untrained eyes what is fake and what is real. But let me hand over to Peter Limburg for answering a whole host of questions.
Well, yeah, first of all, I will concentrate on journalism, and I think the role of journalists have changed in the last years. So 10 years or 15 years ago, we were the gatekeepers telling what will come into public sphere, and we decided this more or less. Nowadays, we are not deciding, because social media is deciding what is important, what is not important. And we have to check what is real and what is not real. So this is one of the tasks of journalists. It's getting more and more into this. Is this real? Is this credible work? But unfortunately, we can't do only this, because we also have other tasks to inform people, also to give incentives, to give some insights and to analyze this. So I think but the role has changed, and we have to do more in fact-checking. But also bringing content on every platform. And yes, I also have mixed feelings about TikTok. On the other hand, if we ignore TikTok, as long as it is working, we also have to be there to at least minimize the damage which has been done also by this platform concerning disinformation. And the other topic is regulation of platforms. I think it's absolutely vital, because platforms, they act like media, and so they have to be also regulated like media in democratic spheres. And the DSA, I think, is vital. We have to implement it and have to work on this. So I think it's always a mixture, and it's not the one answer. But first of all, it's important for democratic societies to support free media. It is, as Katja said, vital. It's a pillar of democracy, and so also to support public service media. I mean, by all the discussions about public service media might be absolutely justified, yes, and there are also always topics where you can say we have to change this, we have to invest less money or whatever. But we should really be careful that the discussion about public service media, and in Germany it's ARD and ZDF, is getting out of control. And it's also something which helps democracy to have this strong public service media. If I travel around only in Europe to see how public service media is working, we have a lot of spaces where democracy is under threat, and populists, either they're right-wing or left-wing, whatever populists, they always try to undermine public service media, especially right-wing populists, as we see in Hungary or we saw in Poland.
Thank you. Sabrina Sperlich is asking, who is an expert on media literacy and who could do the training needed for tech literacy in education facilities? Let me, if you could give examples for that, she's asking. And let me expand on this question and bring in something I read recently about Microsoft and OpenAI announcing a $2 million social resilience fund, I think they called it, to support AI education and literacy among voters, especially among young and vulnerable communities. So a question, is this enough? Are big media and indeed internet companies taking their responsibility? Is this more of a government responsibility to do? Is it a shared responsibility? Where can the resources to come up with the media literacy you just described come from? A question, I guess, for both of you. Start with Peter Limburg this time, and then over to Katja.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think it's absolutely vital that the government is investing in this, and that we have to have either media literacy in school, or we have media literacy in every topic in school, so that this is something absolutely normal. And I have my doubts whether this is working in Germany. And on the other hand, I think it's fair enough if big tech companies do this, and yes, it's fine, but they should also maybe open their algorithms. They should also have more control about it. They should work on their algorithms, because social media, and they're earning money because of pushing emotions and not necessarily facts. So they should switch a bit to get more into facts and less into emotions. But this is maybe wishful thinking. And the third measure, I have to excuse that I take a commercial break, is, for instance, the DW Academy. They work very, very hard on media literacy around the world. They invest into programs, Latin America, Africa, Asia, Europe, you name it, to also bring in more knowledge about media around the globe. So DW Academy is something which is working also very closely on media literacy.
That's a welcome commercial break. But now over to Katja.
Thank you. Just on the question of resources, in general, in Germany, we have the Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung, and they do offer a lot of free resources on every level for media literacy. There's also a lot of NGOs, civil society actors that actively work with schools, and you just have to look them up. Sometimes they offer, sometimes it's just about establishing the partnership, because then the city will pay, but this partnership hasn't been done if we're talking about media literacy. I find, yes, obviously the government has to pay their share, because we pay our tax. So it's this role that we have, this relationship that we have with the government, right? But I think the platforms do have to pay a bit more. OpenAI, I don't know what number is it, 2 billion, you said something? 2 million. Well, that's nothing. They just asked for 50 billion next year in funding. And I find if they're the ones producing content that might be used, then but there are also more efforts, I find, like, for instance, there should be repositories, like the big tech producers of these AI content that will be very difficult to distinguish. They should work together and have like more labeling in a sense and know what content is being pushed over to platforms. So there should also be a vertical communication between platforms and those producers of that content to kind of flag them faster, because if they know that their content has been used, then they know they can automatically label it. And labeling already provides a certain distance to a topic if you know that it's AI generated or not, depending on who you are by now, like depending on how you grew up in a sense. I think, Peter, you talked about something that is very important here, trust. Right? Because it's always about trust. It's our superpower, actually, as a human being, because we know how to establish trust. We know how to establish relationships. And I find, while working with influencers, why they're so effective is because their community established their trust. And I also have some journalists in my group whenever I work with them. One works with Thomas Reuters. The other one was working for the ZDF in Germany. They're working on platforms and they're called community journalists. So they are actually working for these. And it's funny because they have their communities and they can actually say whatever they want to. Obviously, they stick to, the ethics and everything, but they can say whatever they want to. They are believed by their community because of the established trust, because people have this parasocial relationships. And I know that the Foreign Ministry of and in Germany of Affairs has these this group of ambassadors who are called the avant-garde, because they really are good in talking online and on Twitter, especially like the Israeli ambassador, for instance. Why? Because he doesn't stick to protocol, because he's very direct. He just interacts with people, and that's what people want to see online, right? And this relationship is actually what can enhance the level of trust, So I'm thinking maybe the future of journalism is not that it should change so much, but that it should add additional people that also have these communities to communicate, because if that person says that's not real, then the community will believe. And then you don't need to have, because if somebody doesn't believe, it doesn't matter how many sources you show them. It just, it doesn't stick with the cognitive biases that they have. That's why it's so effective. And that's why we're talking cognitive warfare whenever we're talking information space also, because it is a very psychological game.
Thank you,
so
Katja.
It's actually a race for trust always.
Thanks, Katja. Since we're coming to an end of our time already, I want to bring up the $1 million question again by Frauke Sebers. How can we keep the internet free while at the same time holding those accountable to abuse that freedom for criminal anti-democratic activities? And how does AI feature in this? And perhaps we could use this question almost on a philosophical level as a way for closing remarks from both of you. And let's start with Peter Limburg and then Katja Munoz.
Yeah, I think we have to not make something out of this which is much bigger than we think. So I think yes, we have to work on keeping the internet free and not blocking whatever media. So also we in Europe have to think about this, and I will not stress the old discussion around RT, and I also see in other countries that they also democratic countries start to forbid international media, which I think is not the right sign. We as democratic societies, we have to also tolerate opinions which we don't like. On the other hand, that's what we had also already been talking about, is the regulation of platforms. And the ones who are spreading a lot of, who are also help to spread fake news and disinformation, they have to be accountable. So I think it's both things, and if it's $1 million question answer, I don't think so. So excuse me for this, but this is how we try to work.
We're working on it, and perhaps we'll come back to it in future iterations of this briefing. But over to you for now, Katja.
I would say I would just try to answer it very simple, because I think there are so many measures that you could apply. But I think the main framing of our goal should be to use AI to keep our online experience authentic and human, right? To be very clear about what we want, because as I said, human relations, we are humans, and the more I study AI, I notice how important that is to maintain our humanity and to not be tricked into other things, how it is abused. This is our humanity in a sense, to mistrust, to believe in other things. So I would say that should be the main framing, and how we feature all these things through platform mechanics, through algorithms, through whole society approaches, through accountability of platforms, through trying to, even if somebody shuts off the internet, trying to find ways of how to, maybe not Starlink, because there are so many geopolitical incentives to it, but find other ways of making it available actually for people who are trying to get other kinds of different information, to make that as easy as possible for others in a sense. To work it's, as I said, it's on a multi-level step, but I think the main goal should be to maintain our online experience authentic, and AI can be a great tool for that.
Speaking of trust, we at DGAP are very grateful that you, everyone who tuned in today, trusts us and spends their time with us this morning discussing these important questions. Thank you so much to both our excellent speakers. Next week, our Thursday morning briefings will be back, focusing on the upcoming European elections. And until then, I wish everyone a very happy day and a good week. Thanks for tuning in.